Hello, this is Baha'i Focus coming to you from Carbondale. Our guest today is Colonel Tony Pelle. Thank you for coming on Baha'i Focus.
Good to
Colonel
see
Pelle.
you.
You are a colonel, or you were a colonel.
Well, I'm a retired Air Force colonel.
Uh-huh.
I retired from the Air Force in 1966.
How long were you in the Air Force?
I was in the Air Force for some 24 years. Most of my work was concerned with the space program in one form or another. I was Director of Information at Cape Kennedy.
Oh, you were.
I was in the early days in the space program at Aberdeen Proving Ground, White Sands, and was involved with the early German scientists that came over to this country after the war. The space scientists.
That is fascinating.
Werner von Braun and others.
That is incredible. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, I was with the Ordnance Department, which had control of Aberdeen Proving Ground, and as a young boy, let me go back a little bit, as a young boy, I was very much interested in space, and we had formed the American Interplanetary Society, which was a society of young people interested in space and the possibilities of traveling out into space. We were the kooks of those days. Now this is we're going back into the 1920s, the 1930s, and but in Germany there was also an amateur rocket society, and so when the war came along, Hitler nationalized the amateur rocket society, and they became the scientists that worked at Peenemünde and other places that developed the V2 and the V1. In the United States, those of us who had some experience, some of us formed a company called Reaction Motors, which developed the bazooka and other rocket devices, but also a lot of us were involved in working on Operation Paperclip, which was bringing the German scientists to this country.
I've heard of that.
And then also working with the captured German V2s that went to White Sands in New Mexico, and from that came the learning which developed our rocket programs of the future to the present day. And I was closely associated with some of the early days of this program.
That is fascinating. It must have been really exciting to be part of that program.
It was exciting to see the failures and to see the successes. And there were a lot of failures before there were any successes.
At what point in this time here did you become a Baha'i, or did you first hear about the Baha'i faith?
Well, I was in the military in the early days. In fact, I was at Aberdeen Proving Ground when I first heard of the Baha'i faith. I read an ad in, I think it was Newsweek or Time magazine about the Baha'i faith, and wrote to them and never received a reply because I had been transferred in the interval to Alaska. And the first thing I saw, I was Director of Information for the Alaskan Command, which was a joint command, and I saw an ad in the classified listing for the Baha'i faith. I just happened to open a telephone book and to look up something. And I said, my God, they have never sent me any information on it. And I called them and went to some meetings, and within about 2 months became a Baha'i. And that was about 1947. And since then, my Baha'i activities have been intermingled with my other...
So you became a Baha'i in 1947, and you retired from the Air Force in 1961.
1966.
66? And I understand then you went to work at the Baha'i National Center.
Well, what happened is I was in public relations in the Army and the Air Force. I transferred to the Air Force in 47. But what happened is they needed a public relations person at the American National Baha'i Center in Wilmette. And they asked me to come and start such an organization. At first I didn't want to because I was on my way to Hawaii back to settle in a home where I had intended to retire, and my daughter was born there, and we were going back there. And what happened was that I offered them a plan to set up a public information office, and they said, we like the plan, why don't you come and put it into effect? And I did, and I intended only to stay a year. 7 years later, I was still there.
Right. I can remember when you lived in Wilmette.
And we set up the first public information department that they had. That was a permanent department. They had some volunteer efforts, but this was the first professional effort. It grew into a tremendous thing. We had, I would say a couple of thousand public information representatives of the Baha'i faith in every community around the United States. We organized tremendous things in those days. We had a program to get the Baha'i faith known in encyclopedias, textbooks, and the rest of it.
Mm-hmm.
And we did extend the horizons of the Baha'i faith in terms of its being well known in this country. And then in
What would you
60s
say were some of your more interesting or more personally satisfying achievements in public
Well, first of
information for the
all,
Baha'is?
I had a double job. I actually had another job at the same time in the Baha'i faith.
Uh-huh.
I was chairman of the National Teaching Committee, which is the committee that whose purpose is to spread the teaching of the Baha'i faith.
Mm-hmm.
And as such, we had a goal to achieve by the year 1966, which was a plan to expand the faith, and we did that successfully.
Mm-hmm.
Also, in the public information end, I would say that we contacted every author in this country, every writer, and gave them background on the Baha'i faith, which was then very much useful in revising their concepts of the Baha'i faith. For example, the Encyclopedia Britannica had an article written on the Baha'i faith, which was written by a Muslim, and there's nothing against Muslims, but the Baha'i, it's like the analogy is having a Jewish rabbi write the story on Jesus.
Right.
His point of view is a lot different than a Christian's point of view would be, and the same thing here. And so eventually, after a couple of years, we got the whole article written by a Baha'i.
Mm-hmm.
That was one of the big changes.
One of your achievements then was to get the article in Encyclopedia Britannica written by a Baha'i.
Yes, and also in other encyclopedias.
That was in one of the more recent editions of the Britannica.
Right. Well,
within the last 10 years, I think it was,
wasn't
wasn't it? Yeah.
We also went to the chief of chaplains of the military services and said that the Baha'i faith is an important one. Baha'is are in the military, even though they may be in a non-combatant service serving in the medical corps. Still, a chaplain is supposed to know about everyone's religious beliefs, so that, for example, if a Catholic were dying, a Jewish rabbi may be the only one that's available, and he would give him last rites according to the Catholic. And so we said the same thing ought to be true of the Baha'is, but therefore they agreed, and they put the Baha'i faith in their chaplain school as far as learning about it, and we became officially recognized in that way. The other achievements
You've
have a lot
really
of
done some really significant groundbreaking
there
work for the
was
Baha'is.
a lot of new articles, a lot of new features, many new devices that we brought in. We published new publications, public information publications. We put out information kits for police chiefs, for law enforcement bodies, for undertakers dealing with the Baha'i faith, so they would understand what the Baha'i point of view was when the Baha'is were in their community.
How do you think the public's perception of the Baha'i faith has changed since you first became a Baha'i?
Well, all religions, of course, all new ideas, I should say, go through the stage in which you laugh at it, then you attack it, and then you accept it because you say it's obvious, it's the truth. And I think the Baha'i faith has gone through some of those stages. At first, it was sort of, nobody paid attention. It's just that little group down there. But even Christianity, going back to it, went through that stage where there were only a few Christians were walking around, and they identified themselves by putting the sign of a fish on the ground or something. And then they were persecuted, as we know, by the Romans, and then they became the official religion. Constantine made them the official religion. So they go through stages. I think the Baha'i faith has gone through the stage of the first two stages, and we're seeing the persecution taking place in the Baha'i faith. It's been going on even before that, but we're still in that early stages. I think Toynbee, in his study of history, says if you look at the Baha'i faith today, it's about the same as Christianity was in about the 2nd century of Christianity.
So the Baha'i faith is actually 140 years old, and really, in many ways, we're in a lot more advantageous position than Christians were back then, because we have the media and we have the...
I think the analogy, it took Christianity 800 years to get from the Holy Land to England, and the Baha'i faith in less than 100 years has swept around the world. And I think this is no criticism of Christianity, it's just that the Baha'i faith came in the age of the global village, where you can spread things faster. It took longer for Christianity to spread because it was using old methods of communications.
That really wasn't an accident, though, was it?
No, I think the time is right for the teachings. For example, there's a progression in these teachings. You only get as much religion as you need and as much religion as you can understand. And there wasn't a need for certain kinds of religions or religious teachings. For example, Christ couldn't say that the earth is one country and mankind is citizens, which Baha'u'llah said, because at that time people did not know of the full extent of what the earth contained. They didn't know of Chinese people on the other side of the world, those people who lived in the Holy Land, or the American Indians in the other part, whereas in our age we know of all these people. And so I would say also there's a change in the sense that the previous prophets who came, and we're talking here of Moses, and we're talking of Jesus, Muhammad, Abraham, Krishna, Buddhists, and so forth, came in areas of the world. And then they spread from those areas because the teaching had to move out from there. Today, the Baha'i faith, because of the electronic communications, spread almost instantaneously around the world. But that's only the thing. I think the next change will have the faith, probably the next messenger of God to come will speak in terms of interplanetary terms. And so it will not only spread across the earth, but may have to spread across the universe.
When you were in the Air Force, were you in a non-combatant status?
Well, I was a public information director, I would say, almost all of my career.
You were mentioning that there are Baha'is in every corner of the world. I know you've traveled quite extensively.
Well,
what areas have you traveled to?
Well, I visited Baha'is in Iran. This was before the persecutions, of course. I visited Baha'is in North Africa. I visited Baha'is in Central Africa, in South America, in Latin America. I became a Baha'i in Alaska, and now I reside in Hawaii, so there was a big Baha'i community there. I've visited Baha'is in India before, Baha'is throughout most of Southeast Asia, Australia, New Zealand, the islands of the Pacific, even into the Philippines, Japan. I've been to all of these places, Hong Kong.
So you can say just about everywhere, yes.
Now, the Baha'is are almost, I would say the Baha'is are almost everywhere, and the only almost part in essentially deals with the communist-controlled countries, simply because religion basically is prohibited there in many areas of the world.
But I do understand that there are Baha'is in these communist countries.
Well, we hope so, and we hope that they were there before, and that they're probably still there. But we don't talk too much about them, simply because that, as you know, you don't mention things like that in those countries because of the possibility of danger to people.
Right. Can you think of, what are some of the stories that you could tell us about your travels and some of the people that you've met and some of your experiences with some of the Baha'is around the world?
Well, I would say the most gratifying experience is to meet the Baha'is who come out of what we tend in the West to call primitive cultures. People who live a very simple lives in South America, in Africa, in the islands of the Pacific, and we find that perhaps they are truer people of religion than many of us. The reason being that we're so full of things. You know, someone said, if you have a glass with stale water, you can't put fresh water in it, because when you put fresh water in, the stale water will make the other water stale. So you have to empty it. Now, we have to empty ourselves of what we've learned to sometimes learn something new. These people are not full. And so the new knowledge readily is assimilated. They assimilate the teachings of God through their hearts. We intellectualize it, and we say, well, yes, but what about this and what about that? They are more pure channels, probably, for, not probably, but they are much more pure channels to receive the message of God than anyone else.
I've heard many stories of people enrolling in the Baha'i faith in great numbers in some of these so-called primitive countries like Bolivia,
yes, because
Africa.
Because they see the truth clearer than we do. We have so many obstacles because we have so many arguments, philosophical, scientific, and all the rest of it that have to be overcome. I'm not saying that it shouldn't fill the truth, but to them it's easy to see that. You know, Christ made it very plain. He said, unless you are like a child, it's difficult to really understand the truth. The child readily sees the truth, he accepts it. The adult sometimes says, well, yes, but. But there are no buts with the primitive.
What do you think, with the so-called primitive people, what is the thing that you think that appeals to them the most?
I think it is the simplicity of the teachings of the Baha'i faith. Simply put, they can understand the idea of one God. They can understand the idea that all religions really come from the same God, and they can understand that they are all brothers because they've understood this sort of thing. And they can understand a religion that tells you to love one another and to work to help one another. I mean, all the religions have said this, but then, like all great institutions, like plants, the plant grows and it blossoms, and then the leaves fall, and then the plant becomes matter that vegetates and becomes sort of fertilizer to something new. All things in the world go through these stages, and so religions in the past become corrupted. Jesus said, if in essence, if you'd listened to what was been said before and you had kept the religion pure, I wouldn't be necessary. But since you've distorted religion, I've come to straighten you out. His great words were, "Oh, you generation of hypocrites," to the people. You're not really living up to what you say, and so it has to be changed. And the only one that can change the religion of God is another messenger of God. The other changes are just incidental changes which really don't change the religion.
And the founder of the Baha'i faith does claim to be the most recent messenger of God.
Yes, I think Baha'u'llah makes two claims. First, he makes the claim that he is the latest in the line of messengers from God, but not the last. I think that's important. He said, you've had the progression from Jesus, from Moses, Abraham, and so forth, and that he is for this age. Now, the reason he's for this age is because there's a new culture, there's a new time, there's a new civilization. Toynbee says a messenger of God comes, sets up a civilization, and then the basis of that civilization, and the civilization is created. He talks of the Buddhist civilization, the Christian civilization, the Islamic civilization, and we think now that we're going to have a Baha'i civilization coming up. This will be the pattern for it for the future, and then, but there will be another in due time when again the need arises. Another messenger will come and upgrade people. The messenger has four functions. He tells the message you've gotten in before. He reiterates the spiritual laws which are eternal. He gives you how to apply those laws in the age in which you live. And then he does a fourth function, which is a great mystery. He pours a power into the world that attracts people to this religion. Why should people have gone to a carpenter as Jesus? Why should they have gone to a camel driver such as Muhammad? And also he pours a power that advances man in the direction of the teachings that he announces.
That's probably one of the most obvious proofs that Baha'u'llah is a prophet of God, in the fact that when he appeared in the world totally changed.
It did.
And that was 140 years ago.
Most of the changes in the world have occurred from about the 1840s.
Right.
The whole, the terrific changes, the maddening pace in all ways of technology and all of the rest of it has started about that point.
Let's change gears here a little bit. I know you've been to several international conferences recently. And tell us about, there was one in San Francisco, I know, recently.
Yes, I was at the San Francisco conference, which was a peace conference, and it was excellent. 7,500 Baha'is and non-Baha'is attended along that line. And it was essentially the reason I say it was a success to me, I met many people who were not Baha'is who did not attend, who heard about it from friends. And
what was the purpose of this conference?
Well, the purpose of the conference was to discuss more the implications of the message put out by the Universal House of Justice, which is the international governing body of the Baha'i faith, called the Promise of World Peace, in which the Baha'is are calling for an intensive program to establish world peace in the world. They said, now is the time is ripe, and we've got to do it. But I'd like to, before, I know you're beginning to run out of time, I'd like to mention...
we have about 5 minutes left.
I'd like to mention just quickly that I've recently returned from India, and will be going back to India with my wife to dedicate the seventh in a series of Baha'i houses of worship that are being built around the world. The first one is right here in near Chicago at Wilmette. Another one is in Panama. Another one is in Frankfurt, Germany. Another one is in Uganda, Africa. Another one is in Australia. And another one just recently, not too long ago, in Western Samoa. And we had no temple or house of worship in Asia. And now we've just completed one, or will be completing one. And the dedication of it will take place on December 24th of this year in New Delhi. This is a house of worship that is unique. It is in the form of a lotus. The lotus is a symbol that is very prominent in many religions. It's prominent in Buddhism very much, in Islam, in Zoroastrianism. In fact, the lotus symbol is probably the most universal symbol in Hinduism and other religions. Essentially, the lotus grows in a stagnant pond, and it grows in waters that are overcome with all kinds of quagmire and so forth. And yet the lotus, in all this dirt, comes out pure white, and in a sense it represents what the manifestation of God is. It's symbolic of him. He comes into a world of material things, and yet he retains his spirituality and his pureness along that line.
I know it's probably one of the most beautiful buildings I've ever seen.
Yes.
It is apparently nearing completion now. They're working on the interior of it.
Right.
Those of you who might not have seen the beginning of the program, we showed a picture of the India House of Worship at the beginning of the program. It's poured concrete, and it's some of the most beautiful. It's such a delicate building. It's such a beautiful building. Stick around at the end of the show. We'll show it at the end of the show too. But Colonel Pelle is going to be one of the people who is organizing the reception, the dedication.
Dedication of it, the official dedication of it, which will have officials from the Indian government and Baha'is from all over the world. Some 10,000 Baha'is are expected to attend the event. I think I might say before we close that this Baha'i House of Worship, like all Baha'i Houses of Worship, have two purposes. First, they're dedicated to mankind, and all of the people of the world can worship in them, and all of the words of God can be used in them from all religions. But also they are the center where man worships God, but surrounding it will be built buildings in which man will serve mankind as God has said to help. Those of you who help me build the world. And there will be schools, there will be hospitals, there will be orphanages, there will be colleges. These are the things that help make the world better so that we can better serve God. Raise man out of ignorance, raise him out of the animal nature, and advance him towards that man that eventually will be the man that God says will inherit earth. He will be a man that is so different from you and I. He will be a truly spiritual being, in which his animal nature is no longer the dominant, in which his spiritual nature and his godlike nature becomes the predominant thing.
That's a tremendous idea, and I think it will happen.
Right.
We have probably just about 2 minutes left. Do you have any closing statements, anything about the Baha'i faith that you would like to say to our audience?
Well, I think the Baha'is, we Baha'is believe that really there are no Baha'is. That we're not the real Baha'is yet. We're the pre-Baha'is. Because the Baha'i faith is not, the Baha'is are not perfect. The teachings given to us by God through Baha'u'llah are perfect. But we ourselves are imperfect because we bring with ourselves the imperfections, the prejudices, and all of these things. We're working for generations yet unborn, so that they may have a world that's at peace, a world in which brotherhood has meaning, a world in which hunger has been abolished, a world in which illiteracy no longer exists, a world in which men can be now, can raise their heads high, and they can go forward to build the future civilization, the golden age. It shall be on earth as it is in heaven.
Right.
That's the promise of all the great religions, and that's the promise that Baha'u'llah, whose name means the glory of God, has said to us we will achieve.
That's a great statement. That's about all the time we have this week. Our guest this week is Colonel Tony Pelle, and I'm really so glad that you came on today. He's a former Air Force colonel. He's instrumental in the missile program.
I would say the space program.
Space program.
Rather than the missile program.
He was former director of the Public Information Office in Wilmette, the Baha'i National Administrative Body, and he presently is a member of the National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of Hawaii.
Right.
So I would like to ask you to say hello to the Baha'is of Hawaii for us in Carbondale and say
Aloha.
Aloha.
And aloha to everyone here in the beautiful country of this northern part of the United States.
For Baha'i Focus this week, that's about all the time we have. We'd like to invite you to investigate the Baha'i Faith. If you would like to find out about the Baha'i Faith, look in the white pages of your phone book. We have many books in the SIU library in Carbondale and in the city library. We'd love to have you call us or write us, so if you have the inclination, please do so. So for Baha'i Focus this week, thank you for watching.